Usually in the 101 class, I always tell people start with the tropical milkweed because it's the easy one. There's a lot of controversy about it. There's good and bad things about it. If you all haven't heard my speech about I would cut it back 3 times a year, you probably need to hear that. Has everybody heard that speech? You guys heard that speech? Okay, here it goes. So when you plant the tropical milkweed, it's really great for all kinds of pollinators. It is a host plant for queens and monarchs. What I usually do with the tropical milkweed and what I recommend is that you plant it, our spring migration is going to come through normally in March sometime. And they're coming up from Mexico and they're going north. So we are the first ones in the path. So the San Antonio general area, South Texas, is extremely important for the migrations, for hummingbird migrations and for monarch migration. So you want to have good milkweeds for them in the springtime, and it's one of the fastest growing. A lot of people come in and buy it. So the monarchs will lay eggs on that in the springtime. After the monarch migration and the caterpillars have eaten, they've hatched out and gone north, I will usually cut it back. If it's not mowed to the ground from your caterpillars, then I would go out there and cut it back short. I cut it back fairly short. The good thing about this is, number one, it's going to get rid of any diseases or anything left behind from the monarch migration. It also will make your plant branch out and have more branches and more food ultimately throughout the summer. So then that plant, I would give it some fertilizer, and it is going to go ahead and come back out, and then it should be all fresh food for the queens for the summertime. Then as it gets late in the summer, then I would go ahead and cut that back again. You're talking about probably the end of July to the first week in August. And I have that listed if we go down here at the end of the page. It's a very important time of year for you to cut back not only the tropical milkweed, but cut back a lot of your other perennials. So that time of year, there's a specific timing involved with that. So I go out and cut back my perennials. They're tired. You know, they've been blooming all summer long. We've just gone through July. This is June, and this is like July weather that we've been having. So our perennials might look bad early this season. But generally, it's going to benefit most of your perennials to be cut back that time of year. So I cut back my salvias and a lot of my other things. I replant some of my annual nectar plants. So that time of year, I'm going to go out and I'm going to pull all my tall zinnias. I'm going to leave my profusion zinnias. I'm going to, if I haven't already pulled out all the marigolds, I'm going to pull out all the marigolds and a lot of those annuals, and I'm going to reseed. So it's hot, yep. You just got to keep a little extra water on it. Those zinnias and marigolds are going to come up really fast that time of year. So if we seed the last week in July or the first week in August, then all of those things are going to be in full bloom for our pollinator migration. And the added addition to that is if you're doing fall barbecues or anything like that, get-togethers, then you've got really pretty flowers, a lot of nectar for the hummingbirds as they're coming through in the fall, a lot of nectar for all kinds of bees and all of the butterflies. The fall is the most active time for all of the butterflies. So milkweeds. So our native milkweeds, if we are going to seed them, we're going to do that in the fall. You can plant the tropical milkweed seed in the spring if you want. You can also plant it in the fall and it will still come up in the springtime. So you can do that either way. So your first seeding of things like your zinnias and your annual seeds are going to probably be in March. As soon as we think it's not going to freeze again, we're going to start getting that stuff out. If you want to start planting some additional, milkweeds and stuff early March, that's when you're going to do it. Our hot season things, like if you're going to take out, usually I do snapdragons and violas throughout the winter because they're going to bloom throughout the winter. They're going to have nectar for some of the bees. Snapdragons are a host plant for buckeyes, but I let them go through and bloom out, and once it starts getting hot, then I'm going to pull those out, whether it's in pots, whether it's in the ground, big beds or small beds. I'm going to pull all of those out, and then I'm going to plant my hot season stuff, which for me is zinnias. The nectar on zinnias is great for everybody. They will get a lot of action. And zinnias are fairly easy. So the big zinnias and a couple of types are fairly mildew resistant. There are some varieties of zinnias that are really not good because once you have to water them enough to keep them happy, then they get mildew really bad. I would stay away from Dreamland. They're pretty, unless you don't mind pulling them out and then planting something else. But they'll always get mildew. I do like Profusion. It's a smaller single bloom, but I like all of the little nectar flowers that come up in the center of that, and it always gets a lot of activity. And it doesn't get mildew. So if we have, the hurricane systems, when they come through, usually June or later, June through September, sometimes we have those systems that just sit on us and dump a lot of water. And so zinnias will go during that time, except for the Profusion. And then there's one called a big tetra that is a very giant zinnia. I used to not want to plant the giant ones because they would always flop. Well, I was always getting the wrong kinds. So the big tetra works really well because it will get tall and it very rarely gets mildew. So I do like that one too. And all of the hummingbirds like that one because the little center flowers on it are large enough that they can get their little beak and their little tongue in there and drink that nectar. So they get a lot of activity. If you do wildflowers at all, I like bluebonnets. I don't know about you guys, but if you're doing any wildflowers to add to your habitats or gardens, you're going to want to plant those in September. Hopefully we have September rains. It's been a while since we had September rains. So if we do have September rains, you're going to run out there real fast and you're going to sprinkle your wildflower seeds. If we don't, then you're free to plant those like anytime from September through probably December. So if you happen to see a rain anytime during that time frame, take advantage of it and get those seeds out there. So some of those would include things that I really love, like echinacea, the coneflowers. I love those. The more I grow them, the more I like them. And the pollinators really enjoy those a lot. I get all kinds of everybody on those, from hummingbirds, bees, all kinds of butterflies. So those seeds are going to want to come up in the fall so that they'll bloom the next year. They're going to grow slowly over the winter. They're going to get their little roots down. If you do seed native milkweeds, that's the time you want to seed them. If you want to seed antelope horns or Texana or common or showy or tuberosa, spider, All of those types of milkweeds you're going to want to seed in the fall. Then they're going to come up in the spring after they have gone through a cold dormancy stratification process. So this is an antelope horns, and we have a lot of trouble doing them in pots. They don't want to get big. So y'all are used to seeing big plants. So when I bring this in, everybody's like, "Ugh, I don't want that." And it's like $12.99, and you're thinking, oh no. But in a pot, they're not really going to get that much bigger. So this guy's pretty happy for being in a pot. And so when I grabbed him to bring him in to see you guys today, the tuber root was in the ground, and I snapped it. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's why this one is happy, is because he actually got out of his pot a little bit. So isn't that interesting? See how thick that is? So that drills down really, really deep. And that's how they can survive. They come up during the rains, they drill down really, really fast, really, really deep. And if there's any moisture they find, then they'll grow really fast, they'll bloom, they'll make it go dormant, it might go to sleep for the rest of the year until next spring, until we get a little bit of rain. So that's how they survive our extreme climate. I wouldn't recommend this. This is the hardest one of all of them that I've ever tried to grow. So it's the one that they talk about the most. Say, oh, get antelope horns. Everybody wants antelope horns, but they don't know. So that's one reason why I wanted to educate you all, is to help you with that, because you can waste a lot of money on stuff and get really, really depressed when all these plants die and you think it's you. It's really not you at all. So if you need more information or help about any of these, I want to be here to help you guys out. So she mentioned Zizzotes. So Zizzotes is a pretty good one. This has got a nice population of aphids on them, which they often do. People that are just starting out, they don't really understand. Try to tell them, if you have milkweeds, you have aphids. It is a fact. You are going to have them. So if you see perfectly clean milkweeds, double ask. If it's not here, we do everything we can to make sure our plants are clean. Everything that I grow is completely organic. So I don't have any chemicals on any of the stuff from the Butterfly Landing, but Rainbow Gardens tries very hard to make sure that the food that we sell in the butterfly area is all clean for everybody. But yes, if they don't have some sign of an aphid on them, be aware and just ask, have these been sprayed with anything? Your biggest defense for aphids, if you don't already know, is ladybugs. So I release ladybugs on a regular basis. In our habitat, we release aphids on a regular basis here. And when we have an outbreak of ladybugs, they will clean the plants off. I did there for about a month. All of my plants in the habitat and in the growing area were completely clean because the ladybugs had totally cleaned them off. So that's the best way to take care of an aphid population. So the Zizzotes likes dry, which works out well in our San Antonio area, because when was the last time you saw rain? So Zizzotes, it's a really good native one. It's a good host plant for queens and monarchs. In the springtime, it probably has less tough leaves, and they probably like it a little bit better. It can get a little bit tough this time of year, but it also can make kind of a rhizome or tuber type of thing. So that's what makes it so sturdy and drought tolerant, is because they store water in this big tuber type of thing. I transplanted one this spring that I had growing in a large pot that I'd had probably 5 or 6 years. and it had this big old tuber kind of thing on it. And once I transplanted it and gave it more root space and some fresh soil and stuff, it sent up a whole lot of new growth on it. So it's just been blooming away since I transplanted it. So make sure they get dry in between their waterings. If they start looking peaked for any reason, you're probably watering it too much. So in this one, if you can get it to last a very long time. Like I said, that one plant I've had for probably 5-6 years, and I have numerous plants, probably 4 years or so old. So this is a really good one. I would recommend, if you want to purchase a native, the Zizotes is a good one to purchase, especially if you're doing any native areas. Really, really great to add that in because you're doing drought tolerant plants. So good plant. One we don't see a whole lot, and I've had decent luck with them. I have clay soil, so I put them in pots, and I amend the soil to be really fast draining for most of these. This is a common milkweed, and they will get quite large. So depending on where they are, they're probably going to do a little bit better out where you have a little bit colder winters. You never cover any of these native milkweeds in the winter time. No matter how cold it gets, you don't worry about them. They're on their own. No baby in these things. They need that cold spell. These also will make tubers. These have started coming out of my pots and into the ground and around. So that's a good thing. I'm happy with that. A lot of caterpillar food. They'll get up about this tall in the pot area, and the leaves will be about this wide. So they almost look like the giant milkweed trees sometimes. So I have a lot of caterpillar food with these, and I would keep these in my habitat on a regular basis. The butterflies do like them. Both the queens and the monarchs will freely lay on the common. A lot of times they'll be just coming up in the springtime when the monarch migration comes through. This is a Texana, and we have one in the garden. If you guys haven't seen it, I would encourage you to look after the class at the one in the garden. They have been blooming all season. I had several blooming all season last year. They've been in bloom for over a month in my habitat, and I really like it. The problem with the Texana is it's been really hard to find. I, for years and years, couldn't find seed at all. And over the last 2 to 3 years, I have been able to find some seed. So we'll see more and more of that here. And I'll have more and more available for you all. And if you see them here and you want to get any of the natives, I would recommend you go ahead and go get this. It's not quite as picky about the dryness as the Zizotes. It doesn't disappear like the antelope horns. You get a lot of color off of it, and the pollinators really enjoy the flowers. So there is one pollinator that super loves milkweeds, and the tarantula hawk is always on milkweeds. Yes. It's the weirdest thing. And they're big and they're scary looking. They're like a big black wasp, but it's real iridescent. It has orange wings, but it kills tarantulas. And so that wasp loves these things, and I think she probably pollinates a lot of our milkweeds for us. So really kind of scary, but once you know about them, they really don't care about people. You would have to work to get stung by one. They're pretty interesting, actually, really pretty. This is just a fun new thing that I have. This is a blue milkweed vine. It's from South America. I grow it for the pretty flower. It's really not that good of a host plant. I've never had any of our butterflies lay on it. My butterflies, yeah, my people, my little peeps, they will feed on the flowers. So a lot of the pollinators do like the nectar. I just like the color because it's so unusual. Kind of a neat plant. kind of a novelty. How about another novelty? Have you guys ever seen the balloon milkweed? Balloon plant? So this is a balloon plant, and it really does have very pretty blooms. A lot of the pollinators love the blooms on this plant. This plant will feed a lot of caterpillars, so it's good for your budget, and it will get large. It has a seed pod on it that is nice and fat, and shh, girls, don't tell anybody. Sometimes they call it hairy balls. So if you hear of that, that's what this plant is. But the reason I like it is because sometimes we have a challenge feeding a whole lot of caterpillars, especially if you have a larger habitat. You always have a lot of caterpillars. You always have a problem trying to feed them all. So we need plants that grow fast, that are a good food source for the caterpillars, and the caterpillars will get nice and fat on this. So it might be something that you want to get. A really, really pretty one, but I've never seen it bloom in this climate. It is native. It's called showy milkweed. It will get fatter leaves as it gets larger. It is a little more hairy. It has a little kind of more gray fuzz on the leaves, and that protects it from the heat and from transpiration, which is losing moisture. So this one also will get the tubers, and it's one of the prettiest ones when it blooms. Big clusters of kind of waxy like flowers. I grew up in Colorado, and I remember this one out in the fields in Colorado. I used to think it was the neatest plant. Had no clue what it was, but I used to think it was neat. So it's something I don't have as much of usually. I don't grow near as much of it as the others. Purple milkweed vine, it is another native. This one is fairly easy to grow. This one gets huge, huge, huge tap roots on it, kind of like the antelope horns, or bigger. It really likes more part sun, part shade from my experience with it. The monarchs don't seek this one out near as much because it tends to be flat. Monarchs are a big butterfly, and they would prefer to lay on something a little taller. But the queens don't mind, and I've had queens lay on it numerous times. So it can feed a decent amount of butterflies as well. The purple is a very, very dark star-like flower, but it's an interesting plant, and if you're collecting milkweeds and want natives, it's a good one. So the other ones would be giant milkweed tree. We have one out here, and that one does feed a lot of caterpillars. So if you're ever challenged with caterpillar food, want extra, just go to the balloon plant and the giant milkweed tree. I think that's going to save you a lot of money.